Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Mastering Dungeons. I'm Shawn Merwin here with the co-pilot of the Millennium Falcon, or co-pilot of Mastering Dungeons, maybe both. Teos Abadia. Hey Teos,
I
what's
can't make a
flying?
chewy noise, but if I could, I would make a chewy noise right here.
Okay,
I had a
you
fantastic.
could put on the coat.
I could, yes. Someday I just keep it
Yeah,
nearby. But anyway, I had quite the
yeah,
weekend, Shawn. I had not one but two
yeah.
significant events. The first significant event was reading this Blade Runner, the role playing game. That I've been
Yeah.
having a lot of fun reading this. So impressive how freely is able to put unbelievable money into the layout and art. And I don't know, whatever Swedish grant they use for this, hats off to Sweden, because it's just, full of like, just gorgeous. Everything's
Hmm.
gorgeous. But it's also a really neat system. And so I'm going to have to watch the movies again, and I'm going to have to run the starter set adventure because it looks really cool. The other significant thing I
Right,
did was play with chainsaws, like one does, and
as one does.
maybe I didn't quite calibrate for how much weight was coming off the tree and how the limb would rise compared to the ladder I was on. The good news is I stayed on, but I
Yeah.
did, yeah, get a little
Ooh,
something, a little the equivalent of
that's a
carpet
good one.
burn, but yeah, bark burn. Yeah, best avoided.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, in terms of chainsaw accidents, that's probably the least but people are not aware of the they're like, be careful of the blade, and you don't think about limbs coming up rather than falling down, or
Yeah.
trees moving in strange ways as you yeah,
I did
that's
a
a whole
lot
thing.
well. I read well. I prepped, but I was not prepared for the extent to which the weight caused the limb that the ladder was on to rise. It was special, a
Mhm.
special moment for the weekend.
It is. I'm glad you survived. I'm glad you survived. And you know who else survives? Our listeners. Our listeners survive, probably not
They
because they
endure.
listen, but they endure, they abide. Our audience abides, and we appreciate that. We appreciate that so much that we take questions or comments from them via all of the various places where we interact with those fans. And so, with that in mind, we will take some today, including the first one, which comes to us via Twitter from Nigel Rush, who says, "Love the show. Mounts. What do you do with them? We buy a mount, we ride it for a day, we go into a dungeon, and they aren't there when we get out, or we leave by a different exit. So I am eighth level and walking all the time. I don't buy them anymore. What do you do? Is there an answer? It drives me crackers. Eighth level and walking for days like a peasant because my horse was eaten by an owlbear or just buggered off on its own accord. Keep doing what you're doing. The show gets better and better. All the best from South Wales, UK, Nigel." So thank you, Nigel, for listening. And this is an important question. And I see in my future designing a new third level spell called Uber or Lyft, or maybe both. Very convenient, although the gold piece cost can add up after a bit. Uh,
Oh wow.
so what do you think, Teos?
I mean, it is fascinating. I think about this kind of subject. I love the question. It's hilarious. Hats off for making it that amusing a question. Um, I do think about these kinds of changes that just used to be a thing and now they're like not a thing. And for a really long time, it was like, oh, you've got a quest, so therefore you need horses, and you'd get on horses and you'd figure out your movement rate, and all of this seemed to matter. And then the horses got spooked, and like third edition was the whole like, oh, well, is it a war horse? No, well then you can't attack, or you have to get off, or weird things would happen. And after third edition, people were like, no, we don't care. Like just assume that you're always walking, or it doesn't matter whether you're walking or mounted. Like, yes, this is a critical thing, go get it, but you can walk there. It's okay. It's back, spend the night, like there's just it is a weird abstraction, all in the name of, I guess, just not having it fall apart if you don't have a mount. But so what do I do? I think that mounts. I think this is the reality. I'm curious what you think, Shawn. I think that this is the reality we deal in. Just like having too many hit points is a reality we live in. Your mounts are not going to go with you into the dungeon. They are not going to matter most of the time. So as DMs, we have to pick our battles of when we want them to matter, and then make them a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
And by that I mean, like, if you think about the movie Avatar, the one where everybody's blue, a large significant population. You have to like go tame the mount, and then you use it in this significant way to turn the tide of a battle, like that kind of thing. That makes mounts fun. MCDM has the rules that Willie Beal created about for mounts that are fantastic mounts, like things like that. Make them cool and dramatic and interesting, or use them solely in a little low level thing. But otherwise, it is what it is. Get them out of there. Pretend you're not walking.
Yeah. Yeah, and I agree. I agree to a point. And I am not the kind of person who is, let's count every torch.
Mm-hmm.
Let's count every day of rations. Let's do use encumbrance. I'm not that person. I can be if that's what the game is, but then I don't want the game too complex on the other side.
Mm-hmm.
Right. If I'm keeping track of all of this stuff, I don't want to also have to keep track of 42 different actions and the huge list of spells. Right. My attention can only go so far. Players can't even keep track of important NPCs who they're escorting. Right. Or, you rescued, right, Bud from Bud the elf from the dungeon. Okay, now we're leading Bud the elf out of the dungeon, and 7 encounters later, we're like, whatever happened with Bud? We just crossed a chasm. We got attacked by a dragon. Right, we had to swim under this bridge, and half of us couldn't even hold our breath. We get out of the dungeon. We're like, where's Bud? Because Bud, while he's important to the story, doesn't resonate in our minds because we're playing a game in a certain way.
Yeah, we are.
And so, I appreciate what you're saying here, Teos, in that if you're going to have these elements, make them cool for certain things.
Mm-hmm.
But that still brings them it still illuminates the problem of they're there, but they're not important. And now they're important again, and we need to go back and figure things out retroactively. Wait, do we have a mount? Do we have a trained mount? Now, if you're playing a mounted character, which you can in 5th edition, but it's not as important as it was in 3rd edition, where you had real like subclass type. Yeah. So it's a matter of deciding what's important for your game and then doing it. We're going to have a question later, which will come back to actually this question. But it's what's important. Where do you need to focus your attention in your game to make everyone happy? And if keeping track of whether you have a mount or not is not important to your game, then don't make it important to your game. Walking around like a peasant when you're 8th level, you don't need to. While it's funny, right?
Yeah,
you're like, oh boy, yeah, I just saved the kingdom, but now I have to walk for 4 days to get back to the castle because my mount's gone. Just say you're back at the castle, right? That's the answer.
And 2 things. One is, if you want to reflect the fact that they're 8th level, then give them an airship, right? Like Storm King's Thunder has that, has the path forward if you'd like it, right? Acq Inc can help you make it, right? The hardback book. Like, you can have fantastic ways to get to and fro. Give them a base of operations and hirelings who run the ship, the locomotive, the whatever it is that magically moves them back and forth because they're cool and awesome characters who shouldn't be walking. Then you can do that. If you want the mounts to matter, then you will need to come up with tricks to remember them, just like your NPC example, right? You need to have like a card for them in initiative so that you always remember, oh, the mounts do the following, right? They back off, or they start moving away. One of them needs to make a check, and you deal with that level of reality if that's pleasing to you. But it probably isn't. So it's probably okay to forget them in most cases, and yeah, maybe just feel a character special sometimes.
I am now officially writing down the next great idea that I'm working on, which is an adventure where you play the mounts of the characters who go into the dungeon. You're left behind.
Oh man.
Adventure where you play the mounts.
God, that is a great idea. You know what's also cool is you could have like a little template that when your character is riding you, then you get to use their thing, like as a daily kind of thing, like
exactly,
or a piece of their gear that they strap to you. You could use that.
Right.
Love it. I want to play
this. This is the next thing I'm working. Let's see my schedule. Look for this in 2037.
I'm excited.
But boy, it's going to be the best 8th edition D&D adventure that you play. Okay. So Nigel, 2 thumbs up on that question. Thank you very much. Yeah. Next we have Matthew Heimbecker 9055 via YouTube. Would WotC ever consider making a game other than D&D? They have produced other games in the past. Why not now? So I'm going to first start by assuming that you mean role-playing games, because there is this little thing called Magic the Gathering that you might have heard of that Wizards of the Coast does produce. Now, in terms of role-playing games, then, great question, right? They used to make Top Secret. Well, when they were TSR, they made Top Secret. They made Boot Hill. They made Gamma World. They made a bunch of other things. They made Gamma World for 4th edition. So they do. Why aren't they doing it now? I think the answer is this. It costs you X amount of money to make a game, and it costs you X amount of money to make a product for that game. And then you hope to sell X plus Z money when you sell it. So Z would be your profit. X would be the money that you paid for creation, advertising, and so on and so on. So regardless of the game or the product you're making, it's going to cost X to make that game. Whether you're making a D&D adventure or a Gamma World adventure or a Boot Hill adventure or a Top Secret game, it's going to cost you X to develop, design, market, produce that game. So the question then is, where are you getting the Z from? Where are you getting your profit from? And if you are trying to sell a book to 10 million people who play D&D, the chances of you making Z increase. Whereas if you're selling it to 1,000 people, the chances of you making Z profit goes down dramatically. That's the simple answer to that question is, what's going to be your return on investment, and why would you sell something to a small, tiny niche audience when you could sell it to your big audience? There's more to this, but I'm going to let Teos step in now.
Well, I'll add that, your answer is very true for any role-playing game company, but especially for Wizards, a big thing is branding. And there isn't really a reason to water down the branding of D&D with another game that would almost compete with its own space, unless you really could catapult other things. You're not just in the business of product lines for role-playing games. You're in the business of the role-playing games catapulting things, right? You want the Baldur's Gate 3 video game, and you want that kind of synergy and the movie and the whatever. And so if you just throw in Alternity like they did around 3rd edition, or Star Wars with 4th edition, you're either using someone else's IP, the opposite of what you want, or you're promoting another brand that is now, it just confuses the landscape. I think a good question is, why did Hasbro choose to farm out to Renegade, G.I. Joe, what was it? G.I. Joe, Transformers, and
My Little Pony.
To be made by, a different game studio? That's a really interesting question. My guess is it was as simple as availability and focus. They didn't want it probably to exist in the D&D team that would have then had to keep making it or whatever. They kind of did want it to just be over there and see how it does, is my guess. And so they probably concertedly made that choice of no, we don't want this to become a studio thing. We want it to be a one-shot, an offering, and done.
Yeah. That's a great answer as well. Role-playing games make less money than everything else you could sell.
Yeah.
So
I mean,
you
yeah,
want,
yeah,
yeah,
it's
you
true. I
want a
mean,
game
I've
that's going to support those
and
other
there are other
things.
businesses that operate that way too, right? Like I work with a lot of
Right.
companies in the chemical industry, and there was once a guy who said to them, to a number of chemical companies that were in this room, you know, the bubblegum industry makes more money than you do.
Mhm.
The answer isn't necessarily switch to bubblegum, but I mean, you just got to face the fact that you are in a hard industry. So what are you going to
Mhm.
do with that challenge, right? You could sell it all and buy a bubblegum company.
Mhm. Yeah, that's a that's about as good an answer as you're going to get out of me anyway. So there you go. So thank you for that question, Matthew. And finally, Megan J via Discord on our Patreon. What do you do when your players have waded into a slog whose outcome actually matters to the story? So in this context, a situation where you must push forward to resolve an important plot point, but the current play is not fun. And this is a really really good question, to be honest. Much deeper than the two sentences that the question actually involves. And we see this a lot. I love Mike Shea talking about this, where he says, I'm in a 4-hour adventure at a convention. And we spend the first hour, walking through the swamp and making 27,000 survival checks that don't really matter in the long run. And then at the end of the adventure, the DM has to cut the fight with the two lich dragons short because you run out of time. And so the question that was asked here was, how do you get through the slog to get to the fun? And my question is then, why is what you're doing not fun? And what is stopping you from skipping what is not fun and getting to the important stuff?
Yeah.
Uh, Teos, what do you think there?
No, absolutely. I think that we can get as DMs wedded to the material in front of us. I've said this
Mhm.
before on the show, but sometimes I will run an adventure that I have written and I'm reading it. And for whatever reason, maybe it's my mistake, maybe it's whoever did the layout, whatever, I can't find the thing I'm supposed to do, or I can't remember it. And now I'm looking up my own adventure, what I told DMs to do. Why am I doing that? Like, I should just do what I think I should do. It's not like I can't come up with it. I did come up with it, right? Like, I can make this up. And so I think that for me, the answer to this is if you see that the play is not fun, but you feel you must get to the end, find another way to the end. Change it up. You've got nothing to lose. It already is lame, right? Like it's a slog. So
Mhm.
change it, is my thought. Change it so that it's at least interesting, or you tested something, you tried something. I would do something to get it out of there and move it forward. And Mike Shea's comment's a very good one, that you don't want to, spend all your time on a thing that isn't fun. And then when you get to the good stuff, you have to hand wave it because you're out of time. Like just accelerate through the bad stuff, whatever. The monsters offer a truce, anything, somebody turns on them. You discover a clue that accelerates, turns the tide of battle, or that reveals that it's unwinnable. Whatever it is that you need to do to make it accelerate that out of there.
Mhm. Yeah. In terms of like creative writing, there's this old truism that says show, don't tell. And for the most part, that's good advice. It is generally better to show things happening in the story than to tell the reader what happened bluntly. But sometimes it is better to tell than to show, because the showing might not be fun or important, whereas the telling can get the important thing out on the table, which you can then draw upon to tell a better story. And in role-playing games, it's no different. Sometimes the showing, the gameplay itself, doesn't come out to be as fun as you thought it was going to be. So you want to get to the telling. What happens in this story so we can go on from there? And a lot of times this slog can be combat. It can be a combat where you don't realize that every monster you put in has a super high armor class and have many hit points and does practically no damage. So round after round after round, the players are beating on this brick wall and doing very few hit points, but they are in no risk either. And when something like that happens, you can either skip it, say, oh, the monsters or the foe, realizing that they are overmatched, drop their weapons and run.
Mm-hmm.
And because of that, you can now tell what happens. You rescue the princess, you rescue the merchants. Now let's get on with the fun part of the story, which is what quests do the merchants or the princess now give you, and what rewards do you get? And now we're going to move the story forward.
Yeah. Can
you
I add
can
to that?
also switch things up. Yeah.
Just want to quickly add to that this show don't tell. Sometimes all the showing in the world doesn't tell. So, because the players might think, well, maybe this is the challenge is that we must persevere through this slog and just keep doing exactly what we're doing. And that's where it can be important. If you're hoping for a change that's sort of player driven, then communicate that, right? Take the fighter or the barbarian or whoever you think might have some knowledge of tactics and whatever, and give them a role. And based on how they roll, give them some amount of information from the minimum necessary to a whole lot that says essentially, no matter what they roll, that's going to give them some flavor of this is not the path forward, or this is why it's such a slog. You understand, why this is going on, and it's because of this. And then if anything needs to change, they know what it is that they need to do differently, and they feel like, oh yeah, I figured it out, guys. Here's what we.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, all of that's true. And the nature of the slog can also help you decide how to fix it. If it's a slog with combat, sum up the combat into one big explosive something. So within 5 minutes, you have everything wrapped up. If the slog is this long exploration scene where it's just description after description after description with no choices and no possible failures and nothing interesting of consequence, have 2 scenes and then turn it into a big combat.
Yeah.
So make whatever the slog involves, turn it on its ear and do something completely different.
Yeah.
Which will then either break up the slog or just remove that sluggishness completely from the game.
Yeah, agreed.
All right. And now, thank you, Megan J, for that. And now we can move into our news and commentary section, starting with poor Daisy. Daisy has gone missing. I have a feeling that Daisy was not long for this world in her bovine form, but Teos is going to tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so I participated. I managed to do it. Things lined up, so somehow it was available around 11 a.m. every day for something like 4 days. And, last show we mentioned this, and it wasn't clear exactly what this was going to be. The day of the event, and even the second day of the event, no one really exactly understood what this was going on. But on the D&D Discord, the Wizards ran an event about finding Daisy the cow, clearly as a tie-in promotional piece into the Phandelver and Below adventure, which we've all read by now. Just kidding. And it started with everybody in the server would choose a role: rogue, wizard, barbarian, or bard. And the first day was pretty lackluster, especially if you listened last week to our I think it was last week or the week before, the blog that talked about choices and, said, an arbitrary choice. Well, that's exactly what we got. We got, do you go across the rope bridge or do you go down the stairs? And it was just a vote. And that's all we did that day. And the majority decided to go over the rope bridge. And some people tried to think it through, right? But they were prescribing knowledge that we don't really have, right? Like, oh, well, someone said I bet the rope bridge wouldn't support the cow's weight, so it certainly wouldn't have gone that way. And we're like, well, we don't know. We can't make any checks. We can't have a discussion with any DM, so who knows? And then some people said, well, cows don't really go downstairs normally. They'll go upstairs, but not downstairs. But we have no idea whether the D&D team took that into account. So it was just an arbitrary choice. The second and third day featured combat. They would post character sheets, and we leveled up in between days. And so the first day was a mind flare, just sort of there, and we all attacked it. All however 100 number of people who were involved in this, and it was kind of fun. There was a bot that would parse whatever you wrote and see whether a word or keyword in there triggered at the bot. If not, it would ignore whatever you wrote. So I wrote something saying sneak attack and that I was sneak attacking with my bow. It read sneak attack and said that I sneak attacked with my melee weapon. Okay, good enough. Fun. I did a bunch of damage. Yay. And then anyone else who wrote sneak attack, that's the thing they got. And if you were a barbarian and you raged, no other words mattered. If the word rage was in there, that keyed the response. But if you didn't say the word rage and you just said the word axe, well, then you attacked with your axe. So it was a kind of interesting way of kind of botting response. People seemed fairly satisfied with it. The third day involved goblins that were sort of singing and eating. So they weren't necessarily hostile, and this mind flare came and sort of forced them to attack us. And a couple of us tried doing things like, let's persuade the goblins, or they had been singing, let's perform, or intimidate. None of that seemed to be part of the bot keywords. It was all combat. So eventually we defeated the goblin, or the mind flare, and the goblins. A moderator wrote that the goblins had backed off, I think, sort of feeding off of what we did, like any good DM would. We found 500,000 gold on the mind flare, which apparently was 200 gold each. I don't know that was actual math, but I thought that was a hilarious way of writing it. And then on
that's funny.
Final day, there were more of these sort of arbitrary choices that nothing really was there. It was descriptive, but nothing really told you, like, 2 double doors or a small door. But we can't ask whether the small door fits a cow. So, eventually we go out into the outside and we find Daisy has tentacles coming out of her, and she runs off into the distance, forever changed. And I guess we're all enrolled into a raffle, which sometime on Monday was going to be resolved. So that's in my future year past. So somebody will have won a thing for participating. I would say it was fun. It was nice to be involved with a bunch of random people doing things. And we saw some people from our Discord who were there, and that was kind of fun. It could have been better, but it sure could have been a lot worse. It was still fun.
Yeah. It's the only thing that I did not participate, but I heard several people talking about it, is the people who go to Discord are like your most involved people. This looked like more of a fun marketing sort of thing, and so there might have, I guess, maybe it drew people to the Discord. Maybe that was part of it. Because I would love something like this if it was people who weren't going to be grumpy because they couldn't do their 27-step trick to do the most damage, right? It's a find the right audience for the right material sort of thing. And it sounds like it went off fine. So
yeah, it was fine. It was
I have nothing else.
I'd rather see them experiment than not. So so it goes.
Yeah, exactly. But if you are a dungeon master or are thinking of becoming one, you can now hear the secrets of dungeon mastering from Chris Perkins himself. On YouTube, Chris provided a presentation on DM skills. It talked about some of the things that you might have to decide as a dungeon master. I did not watch the entire thing. I skimmed it. Teos, what did you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's an hour long, which I was really surprised. I think I would have split that into several videos, but it's cool. I guess it's based on a presentation he's given before, and has a bunch of slides. And so he maybe at PAX or one of the other conventions he ran this. So he talked through it with Todd, who was doing the film, and it had examples like, what do you do if none of your players want to take on a quest you provided? How do you handle a player that talks over others? Overall, it was a good video with a lot of useful advice done in Chris's style, which is very pleasing to listen to. It's intended clearly for new DMs, but he also, as he said, it was a refresher for people who just kind of want to have a confirmation that they're doing things the right way, or maybe think through, so fine tune a bit your approaches. So I'd say it was really a great idea. Nice use of the YouTube format, and some nice, very good information for DMs who may be new to these kinds of decisions and questions.
There you go. And that's available on YouTube with a link in our show notes. We got news last week that Roll20 has added dungeon scrawl for map making eventually. So Roll20 has acquired dungeon scrawl, and I realized that I had dungeon scrawl in my long list of links here in my browser that I've gone to, and it's a really cool tool. And so we all heard that dungeon scrawl was being added to Roll20, and it made many people excited because it is a really quick and powerful tool for making maps. And if you could just port that right directly into Roll20 and add tokens to it, that's amazing. And there was a demonstration and that showed how the integration might work. So it wasn't, we've got it integrated. It wasn't that here is how we plan to integrate it. It's, this is one way that it might be integrated. Mm-hmm. What were your thoughts, Teos?
Yeah, I mean, it was a bit of maybe pushing it a bit in terms of making it. I feel like a lot of people hearing the announcement or starting to read the announcement thinking, "Oh, cool, I want to use this now." But it really is a forward-looking thing. I think some of it is, well, they've acquired this or made some sort of business partnership with it, but it sounds like an acquisition. So they now, own the site. The site will continue working as it does, and they will be integrating this in. And how much of it gets integrated is hard to say. At least the very basic idea, which is very powerful, very cool, that you can just easily draw, a rounded edge cavern or a straight edge room with a sort of hatching shading that goes around the edges that is a nice, simple look for creating dungeons. So that's great. That's a wonderful addition, and a lot faster than a lot of other ways that you could make a map on the fly. So we'll just hope that it happens soon rather than later, so that people can actually enjoy that. But yeah, Andrew Searles gave the demo, and he had been on our show when we interviewed Roll20. So, again, a takeaway that Roll20 is not standing still. They're adding lots of features. They're looking at what the tool doesn't have. And that all is a really huge positive, right? They continue to make investments, look at what the platform needs, and make changes. That's a win.
And even if you don't have Roll20, you can also always check out Dungeon Scrawl as a tool, because it's pretty powerful. One of our favorite bloggers, DM David, has ranked D&D's controversies. He is going through in a series of blogs the top 10 controversies all time in Dungeons and Dragons. What has he already covered? Number 10 is TSR trashing the original Palace of the Silver Princess adventure. Number 9, TSR being sued by Tolkien because they used hobbits, ents, Nazgul, and Balrogs. 8, TSR demanding that creators stop sharing their creations on the internet.
I'm still mad.
7, WotC moves away from race. What's that?
I'm still mad. I was thinking to myself when I was reading this article, as much as I'm well acquainted with it because I lived through it, like, I think for me, that was the original, like the way some people feel about the OGL now, that was my first moment like that. Way back then, in the mid 90s, just this, that they were telling us they owned the word Medusa and that we couldn't, write about Spelljammer on the internet. I mean, just wild claims, and it was so maddening and frustrating. And back then there were so few ways in which you could engage with Wizards in any official kind of anybody from the company. It was really just TSR back then. It was so maddening to deal with TSR and that, and people would write $T$R, and it was really, to me, that was like my OGL moment, and maybe why the OGL didn't amaze me much, because I've been through other versions of it, but that was the one that really got me.
Yeah. And it also illustrates what we lived through and are living through now with everyone saying, "Oh, it was so great when it was TSR. They loved the fans so much, and they were such a great company." And now Wizards, oh boo, they
Mhm.
corporate, and they do all these horrible things. TSR was just as bad, if not worse, than Wizards for all of the reasons you're giving, and
Yeah,
so many more. That some of us now are just like, yes, we've seen this before. We will see it again.
we'll see it again.
We just keep fighting the good fight.
Yeah.
And so all that is in DM David's blog, talking about that. Number 7 is Wizards of the Coast moving D&D away from using race as a game term and how it handles humanoids as foes. 6 is deities and demigods pulling the Maldabonian and Cthulhu mythoi. That's a again, we've lived through it, but if you don't know this whole controversy, you can read DM David's blog about that, because it's
And,
kind of an interesting story.
and what was interesting is, back in the days of low internet, we didn't really, the story was always D&D did this without permission, which wasn't actually the case. And so DM
Right.
David breaks down that kind of myth that was there for a while of TSR breaking the rules, but really it was TSR not feeling like it could get into a lawsuit over it. But then getting permission anyway, and then deciding not to do it because they were afraid that they would drive fans to other games, and that's why they pulled it. But we're always in the right, I guess, legally. They always had written permission. Interesting.
Yeah, it is. Number 5 is the D&D splitting the game into AD&D and basic D&D to avoid paying David Arneson, and claiming that AD&D and D&D were two completely, totally different things. Speaking of TSR and questionable business practices.
Yeah.
And
So
that's where we're at as of this recording. We still need to hear 4, 3, 2, and 1 from DM David.
I know what one of them's going to be.
Me too. I think that might be number 1.
It just might be.
But hey, who knows? So we love DM David's work. So you can check out his blog at dmdavid.com with a link in our show notes to this particular series. Hey, Acquisitions Incorporated has put out a new or live play that was at PAX West. You saw it. What did you think, Teos?
I got to enjoy it live. DM Chris Perkins does his usual great run. It's a lot of fun, lots of amusing situations, including what to do when a ritual involves sacrificing babies. And that part alone, if you can just hunt down that part where they're at the goblins around a huge fire, is just one of those Perkins moments of setting the players up. And the players, to their credit, handle it very well, both very in character and smartly to avoid one of the many complications that could have taken place. And I write here, viewer discretion is, well, optional, but it is a really fun. And all of it ties directly to the upcoming season 2 that they kickstarted. That is premiering September 20th at noon Pacific. So by the time you are hearing this, probably. And there is a new Acq Inc YouTube channel that is, at youtube.com @Acquisitions Incorporated instead of just the Penny Arcade channel. So you can go there and catch the PAX West show. And I think that's where they will be setting up the new season as well.
A bit of creator and crowdfunding news. You can, if you are going to Gamehole Con, try a new game called Thunder Road Vendetta. We're friends with and fans of Dave Chalker, and we're happy to see that he and Brett Myers have designed the board game Thunder Road Vendetta and are running the game at Gamehole Con. If you go there, you can go to gameholecon.com and go to the event section. We also link there in our show notes to see when and where that is happening. Any other thoughts about this, Teos?
I mean, I've been watching Dave talk about this board game. It sounds amazing. I did not back it on Kickstarter, but I hear great things, and I would love to try it. But all of the times are conflicting. I basically already have a full schedule, so sadly I can't play it. I'm gonna have to pay him money to run one late at night. But you should, if you are going to be at Gamehole Con, you should definitely try it. It sounds like a really fun game. And a reminder, Shawn, you and I will be there. We're going to record Mastering Dungeons live, which has been fun every time we've done it. And then I've put in links to both your events and my events, because we're all running and doing different things, panels and games and stuff. So folks can click on those links in the show notes, or just go to gamehole.com and search for our names, and you'll find the events there.
I was happy and yet terrified to learn that it is less than a month away until Gamehole Con. So I had to actually start paying attention to those things that I would be doing there. But if you're going to be there, please do come to the live recording, or just say hi, or sign up for one of our games. We would love to talk to you. The last bit of crowdfunding creator news is the Festival of Tombs, a solo D&D 5e adventure from designer T.A. Gray, is now available. And you always see some sort of solo game on the top 10 list there. So D&D being a game where you generally need lots of people to play, and games fall through all the time, as I found out this weekend, it's good to have a way to play by yourself sometimes. And these solo adventures give you the chance, Tomb of Festivals being one of them. What's the tagline? As initiate ghost hunters, you and your dwarven sidekick are tasked to find out why the annual awakening, a normally harmless spectral event, has turned deadly dangerous. Navigate the sprawling city of Chesteral, delve into dangerous dungeons, and discover the truth before the Festival of Tombs turns to bloody carnage. That is now available on Kickstarter, with a link in our show notes. One last shout out, Teos. This is near and dear to your heart, so I'm going to let you do that.
We meant to do this a while back, but shout out to Bone, Stone, and Obsidian podcast, which is for sure my favorite Dark Sun podcast. And they've gone independent, much like Mastering Dungeons went independent some time ago. Hosts Robert Aducci and Jesse Heinig have left the Misdirected Mark podcast network. They now run the show on their own. You can find them at cast.athos.org. Though if you have subscribed to the show, like I have, it'll magically, and already has magically updated. I've been actually listening on the new feed for some time. And I'll say that recent shows have had great interviews and coverage. They've gone back to talk to folks like Tony DiTerlizzi. They've talked to all kinds of neat adventure designers. They've been covering different adventures and aspects of the setting. So if you'd all love Dark Sun, head to cast.athos.org, or revisit them on your favorite podcast app, Bone, Stone, and Obsidian. Really good show.